I'm so glad to see all of you intelligent and witty people here today. You all look so nice, coming to visit Uncle Mervyn in his heritage attic. I'm going to tell you about some of the things here, but what I want to tell you about in this story, I don't think you can see yet. They're behind me. What is it?
Potato.
Potato. What does one lonely potato make you think about? Dinner time, I bet you. And what does one lonely apple make you think about?
Lunch.
Yes, lunch. That's right. But if I hold up both the potato and an apple together and remind you that I'm telling you stories about pioneer Adventists, what then do these things make you think about? Yes? Farming? Anybody else? Well, I better tell you about the time when the Millerite Adventists thought that Jesus was going to come on October 22, 1844, and so they didn't need to pick their apples that were coming ripe in October. They didn't need to dig their potatoes because they wouldn't need them anymore, and they wanted their neighbors to know that they really believed Jesus was coming soon, and they wouldn't need their potatoes and their apples. When Jesus didn't come, it's a big disappointment. You know, people had different reasons for looking forward to Jesus to come, as they believed. William Miller was right, wasn't he, about the judgment coming in 1844, and the best scholars have studied that again and showed he was right, but he mixed it up with the second coming, too. Boys were looking forward to having Jesus come soon, so they wouldn't have to get up in the dark and cold winter mornings and go out and milk the cows. And girls were looking forward to having Jesus come soon, so they wouldn't have to cook dinners anymore over hot wood stoves in the summer. William Miller was looking forward to Jesus to come so he could see his friend Jesus again. Oh, and I must tell you, many boys and girls and mothers and daddies were looking forward for Jesus to come because then they would see the members of their families again. See, people had big families in those days. They had lots of brothers and sisters. But often, children died young. Very often, mothers and dads died while their children were still little. There were lots of widows and orphans in those days looking for Jesus to come on October 22, 1844. And when Jesus didn't come, they were especially disappointed because they didn't see their loved ones again in the resurrection. I want to think about that for a minute, and I'm going to go back and talk about William Miller a little bit more. William Miller, you remember last time when I told you a story? He didn't want to preach, but God got him to preach, and he went out and preached. He said he would go if somebody gave him an invitation. Well, soon he had lots of invitations to preach everywhere, and he didn't have time to accept all the invitations. And he got an invitation from one particular minister, the Reverend Timothy Cole, that makes me want to tell you about it. You see, William Miller had become a great preacher, but he didn't look like a great preacher. He still looked like a farmer, successful farmer, to be sure. And when he went traveling, the people didn't pay him even his expenses. And he didn't have money to buy nice clothes. Well, the Reverend Timothy Cole asked his friends, what does Mr. Miller look like? So that when he comes to the railway station, I'll be able to recognize him. And they said, oh, he always wears a white hat and a camlet cloak. It's kind of a camel hair cloak. And Reverend Timothy Cole thought, well, a great preacher like William Miller, he probably wears a very expensive white hat and a very fine camlet cloak. And he was looking for a man dressed like that at the railway station as the train came chuffing in and stopped. But the only man that got off the train wearing anything like a white hat was wearing a very worn and tired and battered white hat and a very worn-out overcoat. And the Reverend Timothy Cole was embarrassed to think that this farmer was going to preach to his fine congregation. Oh, no! The Reverend Timothy Cole hardly even said hello to him, which wasn't very nice. Didn't even bother to pick up his bag and help him carry it, but just walked on ahead and led the way to the pastor's house that was nearby. Hardly said anything all during supper. And when it came time for the meeting, the minister made a very little introduction, and then, too embarrassed to be seen on the platform with this farmer anymore, the minister stepped off the platform and went out in the congregation and sat down among the people and buried his head down here in his lap. But that didn't last very long, because soon William Miller began to preach. And when the Reverend Timothy Cole heard William Miller start preaching about the Bible and heard how clearly he explained it and saw how thoroughly he understood it, the Reverend Timothy Cole began to feel pretty good about having invited Mr. William Miller to come and preach in his church. And his head came up out of his lap, and he began to smile a little bit, and then the Reverend Timothy Cole stood up and walked all the way up the church, onto the platform, and sat down behind William Miller, so proud and wanting everybody to know that he was the one that invited this great preacher, William Miller, to his church. Soon there were lots of ministers helping William Miller preach, hundreds of them. And then there were thousands of people believing. In fact, there were so many people who wanted to come to the bigger William Miller meetings that the churches weren't large enough to hold them. And so the Millerite Adventists ordered the biggest tent made that had ever yet been made in the United States of America. And it was done in 30 days because they believed Jesus was coming soon. And there wasn't time to spend, fiddling around making a tent. You better get it made and pitched. And they moved it around from place to place. This tent could hold 4,000 people. It was a big tent. And that wasn't big enough. Thousands and thousands of people gathered around the outside. And it seemed as though almost every Millerite Adventist had a Bible in his hand. The Millerite Adventists believed the Bible. They studied the Bible. And so the days went by, and it came to be October 1, 1844. Only 3 weeks to go. And this is the time when they didn't dig their potatoes. And they didn't pick their apples. Because Jesus was coming soon. And we won't need to dig our potatoes. We won't need to pick our apples. Because Jesus is going to feed us in the earth made new. Well, October 10, 12 days to go. October 14, Monday, October 14, only a week and a day before Tuesday, October 22. I've got to tell you that on Monday, October 14, 1844, one of the ministers who was helping William Miller died. That was Elder Charles Fitch. I've got to tell you about how he died. Just a few days before he died, on a cold October day, some people said, "Elder Fitch, we want to be ready when Jesus comes. Would you please baptize us?" Oh, Elder Fitch was glad to baptize them, even though he had to do it outdoors in a cold river or a little lake. When he got through baptizing them, his clothes were wet, and he was cold. But another group of people came along and said, "Oh, Elder Fitch, we want to be ready when Jesus comes. Would you baptize us too?" So, already cold, Elder Fitch went down in the water the second time to baptize these people. And when he came out of the water this time, he was really cold. And he knew if he had to go in the water again, he might get pneumonia and die. And do you know? Another group of people came along, and they said, "Elder Fitch, We want to be ready when Jesus comes. Would you baptize us also? Elder Fitch knew he might get pneumonia and die, but it didn't matter. He caught the vision of serving God, whatever cost. And besides, supposing he did die, Jesus was coming back again in a few days, and he'd be resurrected and back with his family again. It would be all right. And so he went down in the water the third time, and when he came out, he was bitterly cold. And he did get pneumonia, and he did die on October 14, 1844. And his little children and his widow went to the funeral, of course. And the Millerite paper, not this exact one, the Midnight Cry, can you see it? The Midnight Cry reported that the widow and fatherless children at the funeral were not sorrowful like ordinary people. They were smiling and happy, sure that they would see their husband and father again in a few days. I can hear the children after the funeral, can you? Saying, Mommy, are we ever going to see Daddy ever again? And Mother said, oh, yes, dears. Just next Tuesday, when Jesus comes, he'll resurrect our Daddy, and we'll be a happy family again. And on Monday night, October 21, is tomorrow the day we're going to see Daddy again? Yes, dears, when Jesus comes, we'll be a happy family again. And in the morning, is today the day? Yes, dears, get cleaned up quick and do your jobs so we can be ready whenever Jesus comes, anytime during the day. And at nighttime, when it was dark and the day was over, the children said, but Mother, why didn't Daddy come? That was known as the day of the great disappointment. I'm glad to tell you that it wasn't very long. It was only a few days after that as the Millerite Adventists studied their Bibles again, they found that Jesus had come. He'd come to a different place in heaven to start the judgment, and that soon the judgment would be done, and then their friend Jesus will come again and raise the dead, and we will have our happy families. And you'll have your grandmas and grandpas back again, right? And the people that you know that have died, you'll see them again soon. So that's the story of the great disappointment and the question, why didn't Daddy come? You're going to be ready when Jesus comes? I'm sure you are. And he's going to come as your friend, isn't that right? And